In Mongolia, they do get drought. It's in the middle of the continent and quite dry, but the big effects are what is known as zud, which is extreme winter conditions. So it's sort of like extreme storm events, but also it's more encompassing than that because it involves also the formation of black ice on the surface of the land, which means that the herd animals can't sort of pour through and get underneath to eat the standing fodder, but not below. And so herd animals can't get at the grass, then they die. It means that the herding community, sometimes they're left with no animals at all, and then they have to migrate into the city, and these zud are a huge impact. And historically they did happen in a cyclical way, so every 7 years or so there would be zud, but like here with the fire or the flooding, it becomes more extreme and more frequent, and so now it's becoming more of a problem, so the herds and the herding families can't recover in time before another one occurs. Zoonotic diseases are those that cross between species. So, like COVID, is thought to have been in bats for many years and then mutated through an intermediary kind of carrier being affected. And then those intermediary species then can pass it on to humans. And so, but it's like the kind of recombination of the virus within new species that becomes the problem. In Inner Asia, across Inner Asia, because of climate change, there's been this permafrost melting. Usually the ground in the north of Mongolia or into Siberia is usually frozen throughout the year. And so we might get frost on the ground, but actually the whole ground is frozen to a certain depth. And previously, because it remained frozen, it would sort of contain the bacteria and viruses in the soil, and they couldn't escape. But things like anthrax that have been in the soil and dormant because of the permafrost, now with melting conditions, it can become released. So there was this instance that I mentioned in the piece where permafrost was melted and then it was in the soil, and then reindeer picked it up, and then this little herding boy died from the anthrax. So, it might have been dormant for thousands of years, and then it comes back to haunt us. And things like the Black Plague, and there's a lot of these kind of viruses that can actually re-emerge through the impacts of climate change. So, thing about herding families is they've lived in extreme environmental conditions on the Mongolian Plateau for thousands of years. So one crucial element is that the mobility of the herd. So being able to seek out pasture that's not as affected, being able to be mobile and move to another location where the conditions are better are crucial. And also another key to the factor in their survival is a multi-species herd element. So they don't just have one species like cattle or only sheep. They have a combined herd of sheep and goats. They have horses, and then sometimes yaks in the high elevations, and cattle and camels in the desert. So they have these species that are well adapted to the environmental conditions. And so in terms of climate change, that's helpful if they have these species that are well adapted and that can cope with extreme environmental conditions. One element that's relevant to China and India is that these zoonotic diseases can spread across borders and between countries. So there's been this instance where these scientists tracked wildfowl like ducks and geese in intensive farm conditions in China or India. These species, they get bird flu, and then that can go to the wild population, and by tracking these wild birds, they found that the bird flu could reach remote regions in China and then on to Mongolia and Siberia. So it kind of like the coronavirus spreading by plane to different countries very rapidly, birds can also spread disease very rapidly. And so even though these kind of diseases may seem less relevant for a herding community, they are still connected with the rest of the world.